She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride, and she don't care.
Hi everyone, this is Melbourne Games Coach coming to you with a new series. This one is called Ticket to Ride. It's going to be a review of my games from the Ryde-Eastwood Open, which was recently played obviously in Ryde-Eastwood in Sydney. And what we're going to do with this series, basically one video per game. So it's going to run over 7, possibly even 8 videos if we do a sort of summary video at the end of it. But we're going to be looking at the games I played over the weekend. It was a 7-round tournament, fairly strong, had a few IMs, a few FMs, so very strong tournament. And first round started off against Jamie-Lee Guo. To give you some idea, I was actually on board 24, so I was a 24th seed in this event, so reasonably strong tournament. Jamie-Lee doesn't have a FIDE rating, but has an ACF rating of just under 1400, which is, I guess, fairly equivalent to 1400 FIDE or thereabouts. So I'm white in this game. Jamie-Lee's black, and started off with my usual default. Jamie-Lee played knight f6, and I played the what's known as the pale face attack, even though it's a bit of a misnomer. Pale face, sort of, I'm assuming, being there as an anti-Indian type of description, even though the Indian pale face refers to as the North American Indian, but that's beside the point. The main idea that I'm looking for here is to transpose into a black Mar-Demo gambit via this kind of move order with d5. Obviously, with f3, the obvious threat is to play e4, so d5 seems like the natural way to defend that. So if d5, then play e4, d takes e4, knight c3, and e takes f3, knight takes f3, we're back into a black Mar-Demo main line, which I'm more than happy to play, especially against someone who's you're looking at sort of 500-600 points lower rated than me. I'm very happy to play that type of position. Yes, I'm giving up a pawn, but theoretically, at least, for not much compensation. But I'm more than happy to play that position, and I'm confident that I'd be able to get the point out of it as a result. Having said all that, Jamie-Lee played g6, which is a line I get fairly often, looking for a King's Indian type of setup. Again, I'm happy to play against this setup, and I set up with this, again, e4, bishop e3 type of setup. The 150 attack is kind of the general name that's been given to it, which is basically sort of a, I guess, FIDE 8800 is sort of, it's like the 1800 attack. Apparently came about from some weekenders in England where I think it might have been people like Mark Hebden actually started playing this sort of stuff. The idea of getting the sort of bishop e3 and queen d2, and sort of trying to swallow off with the bishop, with the black squared bishop by playing bishop h6 and sort of hacking on the king side. Another way of playing this, rather than having a pawn at f3, is to put a pawn at h3, again stopping sort of knight g4 ideas, and play a knight to f3 and then maybe a g4 later on, but similar kind of ideas of trying to attack down the king side. So at this point it's all fairly standard. Jamie-Lee played c6, which is reasonable in this position. It's sort of non-committal, but still a useful move. The queen wants to get out. It helps control d5, helps potentially support a later b5 or something like that. So I followed up with the natural queen d2. And here, rather than playing a sort of more normal move, in this position a more normal move might be something like a b5 or a bishop g7 or a knight d7. Instead of all that, Jamie-Lee decided to play queen c7. Not in itself a bad move. It's fairly flexible, but it is giving it's moving the queen to a square that it may or may not want to end up on. It might end up wanting to go to c7, but there might also be other situations where the queen might want to go out to, say, b6 or a5, or maybe just stay on d8, and rather figure out what to do with the other minor pieces first. It looks pretty obvious that the knight wants to go to d7, the black squared bishop wants to go to g7. We're not really sure at this stage what to do with the white squared bishop, but maybe sort of ideas of b5 and bishop b7 might come into play. And all these can be done before the queen moves. So yeah, flexible, but at the same time it's sort of, in a way, isn't really achieving much as far as developing pieces is concerned. Here I actually have the option of playing c4 and heading into a King's Indian sort of same-ish type of setup. Often in these type of setups, c5 is a more usual move rather than e5, as with a lot of King's Indian positions, given that you've got a pawn on f3 rather than a knight, so there's not that sort of pressure and tension on e5 that you might ordinarily have, and this way you can keep the long diagonal available for the bishop without sort of having that need to put the pawn on it to stop white's threats in the centre. However, instead of doing that, I decided to play knight c3, so it's heading towards a more of a Perk type of position, at least as far as the black structure is concerned. Generally play a6, which seems fairly natural. Again, consistent with this idea of trying to get some play on the queen side. I followed up with knight ge2, and this is where it sort of became apparent to me that Jamie-Lee was playing very passively. He ended up playing b6 here, which seems really like a very passive alternative. The more active option was b5, which is what I was sort of expecting. And in that situation, I was sort of looking at, again, continuing with what I ended up doing in the game, was sort of pushing the pawns on the king side. But if the pawn ever did get down to playing d4 and there was this throw on knight, the type of thing I was looking at with the knight was sort of redirecting around to f2 via d1, something that I've done in a lot of similar positions, just rerouting this c3 knight if there's any pressure from the b pawn. So I was more than happy to do that. What it does do, it means I have to delay castling for a move or two. However, I can still go about the other sort of plans I had with, g4 and knight g3 and that sort of thing. And then once black commits to playing b4, I can then play knight d1 and knight f2 and then castle a bit later on. However, having said all that, it's all very hypothetical because it didn't happen. b6 is played, so I continue with my ideas on the king side of g4. Black played bishop b7, knight g3, and again another opportunity to play something a bit more active. e5 and c5 sort of seem like the logical moves in this position, maybe even probably not so much d5 because I'm going to follow up with e5, but doing something about the d pawn, again maybe even b5 if you're willing to concede that b6 was a bit of a wasted move. But here, rather than play e5, black play e6, again very passive, so I was more than happy to continue with bishop d3, again expecting something like c5, but my again that plan for the c3 knight to go via d1 and f3 means that there isn't going to be that issue that you sometimes have in these sort of positions, where, for example, black might play c5, and if you follow up with a move like knight ce2, you actually trap the d3 bishop, so that moving the pawn up to c4 actually wins the bishop. Obviously I wanted to avoid that, but obviously with black playing e6 I can't really see that sort of thing becoming a problem anytime soon. So again, fairly passive option h6 for black. It does create a bit of a target for me on the king side. It also probably tells me that black probably isn't thinking so much about castling king side. So that really made my decision to castle queen side something I was definitely happy about. Black played knight d7, finally developing the knight to the square that it's been wanting to go since about move 5. Again, h4. And black finally castles on the queen side. And this is where I look for a bit of a breakthrough on the king side with g5. Obviously we are attacking the knight on f6 as well as the pawn on h6. Swapping off doesn't really help black because of the development problems that he has. I can recapture with the h-pawn, swap off the rooks, and I've got the h-file to play along. The knight doesn't have that many good squares to go to, and the rook can potentially invade on maybe the 7th or 8th rank, and possibly follow it up with, say, a queen h2 or some kind of idea like that. I also might be able to get away with, if you swap off the h-pawns, maybe move like f4 and f5, again trying to break open the king side some more. So knight g8, we're going to play a fairly passive option, and then again to try and create some kind of permanent weakness on the king side, h5. Black played, took on g5. Here, rather than recapturing immediately on g5, I took on g6. The idea of this being to leave black with a weak g-pawn. I'm always going to be able to recapture the pawn on g5 with the bishop, and even if, let's say, black pushed the pawn to g4 at some stage, I could probably even go about playing a move like f4 and try and round up the g-pawn a bit later on. Having said that, rook takes on h1, and then black played f takes g6. So naturally I captured on g6. And in terms of the pawn structure, you have two very obviously weak pawns here for black. The g6 and e6 pawns become real targets in the position. Obviously now I've got the threat on the rook. Rook e8 seemed like a fairly natural move here. I think I was probably looking at maybe playing rook h7 or something like that in response to it. And again, trying to build up to eventually play e5 instead of trying to fix the pawn on a white square and eventually try and round it up. However, black decided to put the bishop in the way. I was more than happy to swap and gain a tempo with queen g5. Here black actually made a mistake. He actually picked up the, instead of picking up the knight from d7, he actually picked up the knight from e7 and played knight f8. However, instead of this knight f8, he actually moved the e7 knight, and as a result, given that it's a touch move rule, he had to move that knight on e7. So given that there's not really much of an alternative with the pawn on e4 and the pawn on g6, black then had to play knight g8, and if there was any doubt about the game being over, that kind of sealed it. Queen takes g6, obviously free pawn, but I don't think there was much you could do. The e6 and g6 pawns are just going to be too weak here. What I actually had in mind here, I was looking at ideas of bringing the rook down to h8, maybe h6 or h7, but something to get in on the h-file, possibly an idea of queen f6, and trying to pile up on things like the knight and f8. Again, which really doesn't have very many squares, and given that the queen's on g5 always has that pressure on the e7 knight. So knight d7 is not an option. So there was that as well. Other ideas here, I've got the knight on c3, might want to So come around to f4, and again pressure on these two weak pawns. That was the plan anyway, but it didn't happen. So after knight g8, took on g6. Black played back to e7, queen takes e6. Again attacking that knight. Rook e8 to defend it. Again to attack it again, exploiting the pin. Knight f5. Again, the d7 knight this time is pinned, so you can't move that. So king d8 to protect knight. Knight takes d6, winning another pawn, and again attacking the rook. Also cuts off the escape squares for the king. So black plays rook f8. The rook invades on h7. Again, attacking the e7 knight, and it's really difficult to defend. You have to use the queen on c7 to defend, or try and come up with some kind of method of rearranging with the knights. The knight c8 idea fails to knight f7, where you've got to give up a rook, if not more. So knight f6 is an attempt to get out of that, trying to attack the rook, then simply rook f7. Then I'm winning at least the piece here, if not more. Obviously threatening rook takes rook with mate. I'm also threatening to take on f6 immediately, either with a queen or with a rook, and if rook takes f7, simply knight takes f7 with check, king goes to d8, and then I can just take on f6. At my leisure, I've got e5 coming. I can also go back to d6 and the bishop can come in. I can also use the e4 square. This is where Jamie-Lee decided to resign. It's pretty convincing from this point. You've just got a game where black was simply too passive. So yeah, that was a pretty good start to the tournament. We'll continue this series next time. Hopefully it won't be too long. I might be able to try and get up another video in the next day or two, and hopefully get the series out hopefully within a week or two. So hopefully you'll see how it ended up in this tournament. So once again, thanks for watching. Don't forget, check out the blog if you haven't already, melbournegamescoach.blogspot.com. Thanks.